Hello and welcome to the official podcast of Palate Exposure, featuring Ilona Thompson, a podcast for those seeking the ultimate in wine, food, and travel. Each week she interviews winemakers, chefs, celebrities, and a variety of guests that shape the way we enjoy life.
That's quite a reconnaissance mission. That's only one story in the book, of which there's lots. You have, over the course of this discussion, mentioned so many names. I was sitting here thinking, how is it that you have such extraordinary memory?
I don't know. I do have a good memory, and I don't know why. My dad had a good memory. My mom had good memories. I have such a good memory that I wish I didn't. I remember things like,
I'll take some.
I don't know when it was. Let me see. Probably back in 1949 or 1950, I learned that there's an enzyme in the human lungs called carbonic anhydrase. And carbonic anhydrase is the enzyme that makes carbon dioxide come out of red blood corpuscles, come out of solution in the blood and release it in the lungs. And it's the reason that you breathe out carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide's in solution when it's produced due to metabolism in the body, and it uses oxygen. The blood takes oxygen to wherever it's needed, and then the oxygen burns whatever it is, oxidizes whatever it is, and that's how the body gets its energy. And the oxygen, of course, becomes carbon dioxide because the oxidation, and the body has to get rid of carbon dioxide. Well, it's in solution, it's CO2 in solution, and it gets back to the lungs, and if it weren't for the enzyme carbonic anhydrase to release it, that's why we're alive. That pushes the CO2 out and you can breathe out. Well, carbonic anhydrase is a protein like all enzymes, but it's a very unique protein. It has a zinc atom in the protein, connected to the protein, and the zinc is what does the job, the zinc protein complex. Now, I don't need to know that. I wish I could forget that, but I learned that back in 1949 and I can't forget it. That's my memory.
That's extraordinary.
I don't need to know about carbonic anhydrase, and neither does the listening public, but that's my memory. Now, I don't trust my memory because I find that my memory is getting more and more poor. I can't rely on it sometimes. I remember things that are not quite. I'll look in the paper, I'll look in the book, and it didn't quite happen like that. It happened a little bit differently. So what I did in this book is I started finding things like the day, my very first day at Gallo, when they showed me what a bottling line looks like. I'd never seen a bottling line bottling wine before. They used screw caps. Nobody used corks. At least Gallo didn't back then. And they were running the Sauterne, bottling white wine called Sauterne, down the line. Bottles were clinking together, and I was very impressed with this line going like the devil, just really bottling wine, hand, fist over hand, hand over fist, and all of a sudden it stopped. It came to a halt, and but nobody went to lunch. No, they all just stood and waited. The ladies on the line and the manager of the line, and I asked one of them, "What happened? What, something break?" "No, it's just a label change. Don't worry about it." And he talked kind of fast, and I wasn't sure if I'd heard it correctly. Did he say label change? I thought he did. So I just stood there, and then the manager came over, and he had a little cardboard box, and he went over to the labeling machine, and he took out the labels that were in it and set them here, and he put some new labels up there. He put his hand in the air and with around in circles, started up the line again, it started again. The very same wine, the very same bottles, the very same everything, just a different label. And I thought, gee, I didn't know they did that in the wine business. I went over to the end where they put the bottles into the cases. The old one had said Sauterne, the one that I'm used to, and there's a picture of it in the book. And the new label said Chablis. Well, I didn't know what Chablis was. Chablis is a region in France. I didn't know it then. And it turned out that it was a test. Somebody had told Ernest Gallo that, Ernest was always trying to sell wine, trying to get it to sell, get somehow some advantage that he could get to pass up the other wineries. And somebody told him, well, maybe people are just tired of the old Sauterne label, and you ought to maybe try a new one. How about Chablis? So Ernest says, okay. So he picked a test market, happened to be Houston this time, and they bottled enough Chablis for the Houston market. About, I don't know, it must have been a couple of months later, I was talking to one of the salespeople in the company. We didn't have a lot of connection with salespeople. I did, because I was making new wines for them. But most of the people in production, that was production, and the people in sales was sales. And so we didn't see a lot of salespeople. But I was talking to one, and I asked him, whatever happened to that marketing of that marketing test where Chablis was tried? And he said, it was just exploded. He said, and then he started to laugh. And he says, you wouldn't believe this. He says, but I'm telling you the truth. We must have 20 or 30 letters from people in the Houston area telling us how much better they like the new Chablis over what they had used to like in the old Sauterne. The old Sauterne is no good. They love the new Chablis. Same damn wine, same bottle, same everything. And I thought that was really funny at the time. And so, my memory being what it is, I thought, well, I better keep track of this. So I made a little note, the Sauterne Chablis test, and I put it in a cardboard box. And I started finding all kinds of things that were very interesting and fascinating about wine and about the people in wine, things they did that were stupid and things they did that were brilliant. And so I'd put them in a box. And so I don't really have the great memory that I like to tell you I have. I don't. What I did is I put it in cardboard boxes, and 30 years later I had lots of cardboard boxes. I still have them. And my granddaughter, actually, Remy Barrett, dug into them, and she said, Grandpa, this is fascinating, this stuff. She started reading it, and she said, you ought to put this into a book. And I'm 80 years old. I thought, well, I'm never going to do it. I better do it now. And so I did. So I started writing, I think, I said at breakneck speed, but after Sandy got rid of it, I didn't get more than a page or two a day, actually, and that's what it took. Book's got almost 500 pages, got 450 pages of text, and so it took a long time to read. Probably wrote it in about 2 years, I guess, something like that. And then she and I spent another year redoing it, going through and nitpicking the English, the typos and so on, and cleaning it up. And so it was about a 3-year job to do. But my memory is, thank God for cardboard boxes with notes. I would have no memory at all now.
I am feeling a tremendous amount of gratitude right now, as I'm sure anyone who's listening, for those boxes. And let me tell you why. In addition to this being such a compelling, moving, pleasurable read, what it delivers is something that's uniquely necessary. You're the person of precision. You're the person of purity, of intent. Everything you do is backed by reason, science, truth.
Yeah, as far as I know, there isn't anything false in that book.
No, there's no possibility for, there's no false bone in that body. And even getting to know you a little bit, it becomes so apparent. And people that's been listening to us, I'm sure, have picked up on that. You're so extraordinarily candid and honest, it almost makes me physically want to sit up straight, because I am in the presence of something that's just, it's a unicorn. And the reason it is so important is because, as I made a remark earlier about living in false reality, we've created this pseudo world for ourselves, and the wine world particularly lends itself so well to it because there's so many nebulous, ambiguous pieces to it. And there's so many people that populate it that really have not been practically involved in it. It's all some type of marketing, whether it's trade relations, media, there's a lot of, peripheral involvement. And there's so many falsehoods that get propagated and repeated and get to the consumer that, I've had an objection to it ever since I got into the wine business. And it's been very discouraging to me because I want to learn the truth so that I become a correct messenger to the people that, don't spend their lives around wine. They just want to hear what's important about it. So this podcast, in fact, was born partly out of a frustration that in my journalism world, I could not achieve what I wanted, which is for your voice in first person to tell the real story to the end user. And everything you said is an antidote to a lot of nonsense that exists.
Yes. I've had the same feeling in the wine industry. You can't be in the wine industry without thinking to yourself, "My gosh, there's an awful lot of bull in this business." There is, and somebody said BS is the name of the game, and it kind of is. Just because the label says Chablis and the other label Sauternes, that doesn't necessarily mean they aren't the same wine, because they can be, and they are, and that's only one small example. And there was a good reason to do that. But there's a lot of things going on in the wine industry that, near the end of the book, I try to, without being too negative, I try to give the reader a picture of what I fear about the wine industry. We started out, if this book has found the beginning for California, for America, it probably did. The beginning was love of alcohol, worship of alcohol even. That's how it started out. And then it went through, and the wine industry became a search for quality in wine, really, really good quality. And that reached kind of a peak maybe in the 70s and even 80s. And then somewhere along the line, the BS came in and started taking over. What you had was some writers, good writers, who also think that they're good tasters, but they're wrong in that.
Not one and the same at all.
But the thing is, they're good enough writers that they've convinced the people that what they like is good. Okay, there are several examples, and I don't need to name any of them because I think people are going to know who they are. One guy was bragging about he tastes wine virtually every day, all the time, all day long. He's tasting wine. Well, you've tasted wine as I have in commercial judgings, and you've got to sip some water, and you've got to always spit out the wine, and you've got to sip water in between, and you've got to take a break every so often, and you've got to have a lunch and forget all about wine, and then come back, and then you can be a good judge again. Anybody who, most of all, when you taste wine, when you judge wine, you have to not know what the wine is. You have to have just a number on the glass. 654, 316. Number 316, I felt had a little too much tannin. The flavor was nice, but the acidity and tannin were completely out of balance. The tannin made it bitter, and the acidity made it sharp and sour, and it's not a good wine, even though the flavor was good. The next wine, number 456 or 654. That's a terrific balance. It just couldn't have been better. There's enough sweetness in it to cover the acidity, to balance with the acidity, and it also tempers the tannin. The tannin could have been rough, but in fact this tannin is not. It's very nice, so it makes a very nice wine. If you're looking at the label when you're trying to evaluate the wine, you can't make those decisions. You can't recognize them. And so it's critically important to not know what's in the bottle that you're tasting. Well, the writer that I'm thinking of always looks at the label. He's got this group of wineries that send him samples, and they want to get high scores. And so he's looking at the label there, and he tastes it and says, well, is this better than the wine they had last year? I gave them a 98 last year. Well, I don't know. I'll give them a 98 again. Somebody else, like Ilona and myself, if we were to taste the wine in a judging, in an evaluation, we might say, oh my gosh, how could anybody like this wine? It certainly isn't worth 98 points. It's got so much alcohol, I can't drink it. I could never swallow it. It's hot. It burns the inside of your mouth. There's no wine flavor in it. What they've done, as a winemaker, I could taste the wine and see what they've done. There's so much alcohol in it that it becomes unpalatable. And the way they've done that is they've let the grapes get way too ripe. They let them get ripe, too much sugar in there. That's how they get the high alcohol. But in the meantime, the flavor came and went on the vine. The flavor, Pinot Noir is a good example. You get top notch Pinot Noir flavor, top quality Pinot Noir flavor at between about 23.5 and 24.5 bricks, 23.5 sugar, 24.5 sugar in the grapes on the vine. If you let them go to 27 or 28, you've got a lot of raisins. The wine doesn't taste like Pinot Noir anymore. It tastes raisiny, pruny, porty, too much alcohol, and not good flavor, not good Pinot Noir flavor. Well, that's what I fear could be happening because so many good wine writers who are poor tasters, but believe they're good tasters, have convinced the public that very, very high alcohol is good. And now I see occasional Chardonnays, white wine, mind you, Chardonnays at 15.5 alcohol. I'm not going to even taste that wine. I mean, I know that wine is unpalatable. You see the legs on the glass is just running down from the alcohol content in the wine. You can see the alcohol in it. And I'm speaking as a scientist. You look at the legs and you can see that there's alcohol without even analyzing it. You can see it. You can smell it. It's hot. It smells like rubbing alcohol. It doesn't smell like wine alcohol. And you do not smell Chardonnay flavor. That appley character that you like and that makes Chardonnay what Chardonnay is. Appley, fruity, mostly apple. But it varies. I can't tell you the variety of apple it is, but it's a Chardonnay type character that you're looking for won't be in that wine, and it won't. And yet, I've said this to many, many winemakers in the last 10 years, that I worry about the high alcohol in the wines that they're making. And they say, well, I don't drink the wines that I make to sell. Why not? Well, it's too damned alcoholic. And I say, yes, that's true, it is. Why don't you drink it? Well, I can't drink it, but I said, why do you keep making it then? Well, that's what the market demands. And so I worry about the market today demanding such high alcohol wines that they aren't good anymore. And one of the groups that I taste with occasionally, it's called an old wine night tasting, old wine night. People who come bring wines that are at least 30 years old, that they believe to be good. And then we taste them and talk about them, say what's good about it, what's bad about it. And there are some very, very nice wines that are 30 and 40 years old. Well, being a scientist, I can tell you with absolute certainty, table wine made with 15 or 15.5% alcohol will not live in the bottle more than 6 months. They simply collapse. They fall apart. Andrei Chelyshev, the winemaker at BV, the great winemaker who was really established BV, told me many times that a wine has to have, just like people, if you want to know what's a good wine, like a good person, a A good wine has to have good acidity. Acidity is the backbone of wine. That's his words. I never thought of acidity being a backbone, but it's the structure of the wine that everything else goes from. And he said you have to have acidity. Well, the 15 alcohol wines have lost their acidity because acidity goes when the flavor goes usually in the grapes, and when the grapes become raisins, they're flavorless and acidless. There's just nothing there but the old Thompson seedless. And you might as well plant Thompson seedless and get 16 tons per acre instead of planting Chardonnay and only getting 6. They're wasting their time using Chardonnay, I think. But as I taste wines over and over and over again nowadays, I'm seeing way, way, way too much acid and way, way, way too little acidity. There are bacteria. There's one that comes to mind. Pediococcus is what it's called. Coccus is the bacteria around, like little balls. And Pediococcus grows. It can't grow in good acidity. If there's acidity in the wine, you're not going to have Pediococcus spoilage. But if you get rid of the acidity, boy, Pediococcus runs rampant in wineries. And the best way I can describe the flavor of Pediococcus is like, you got to remember I grew up on a farm, it's like sweet cow manure. And that's just the flavor that I get when I smell that wine. It's like sweet. It reminds me of being back in Iowa. It's that manure smell. And people start to laugh and say, wow, really, cow? How do you know? Well, there's a huge difference between horse and cow, a huge difference. I know that, and they make fun out of it. But in fact, that's what Pediococcus smells like. And I smell that in lots and lots and lots of wines now. It's probably good that the wines don't live very long, because by the time the wine's 1 year old, the vintage is 1 year old, you might as well dump it down the sewer. I mean, I would have dumped it down the drain to begin with, just seeing the alcohol content. And that's what I worry about. And I said that in the last chapter or two. I tried to say, well, that's what I'm afraid that we may have gone full circle. We started with the end of Prohibition, worshiping alcohol, and we may have come all the way full circle to now worshiping alcohol again, because this guy liked high alcohol wines and has convinced people that that the high alcohol wines are what they ought to have. I do know this, that times change, customs change, and Dan Berger tells me that he's a good wine writer who is a good taster. And Dan tells me that you ought to look at those wines that are high alcohol as cocktails, because he and I are used to drinking wine as an adjunct to food. It's liquid food, so you're enjoying solid food, you have liquid food with it, you have wine with steak or whatever you're having it with. And so you have the right wine with the right food and you like it. It adds to the meal, it makes the meal more enjoyable. He said there's a whole bunch of younger people, mostly, the millennials, that's what he said, and maybe he's right. Millennials may not be the only ones though, but they're generally younger people who don't drink wine necessarily as an adjunct to food. I think I know why. It's because the 15 alcohol wine doesn't go well with food. He said they drink them as cocktails instead. So they don't drink spirits, they'll drink wine, but they'll drink wine at 15 and 16% alcohol because it's a walk-around wine. And that's what Dan calls it. He calls it, those are walk-around wines. So when you're judging them, you ought to try to be more generous to the 15 and 16 alcohol wines, because they're walk-around wines, and maybe that's what the time, the customs have changed now, and people today are drinking walk-around wines. Well, maybe he's right. If he is, I think it's a shame, because you lose a lot when you can't have wine with your dinner, it seems to me.
Well, you've just heard a powerful case from Richard why this is required reading. But let me kind of add my 2 cents. So in communication business, I've racked my brains over how we solve a problem of how to help consumer drink well. Because my job is to make sure that people that read my articles, listen to this podcast, and not just mine, but anybody's, have a takeaway. When they stand in front of a shelf with a sea of labels in a grocery store, I want to help them make up their mind. And that's a huge problem that is not easily solved. But I think you just offered a solution in a way that I think we all need to think about hard. We have collectively changed the conversation, not for the better. We got away from the truth. As a scientist, as an observer, you measure things on merit. Not on its marketing merit, but actual physical merit. Your conclusions are drawn from that. And that's not something you can dispute. It actually is a yardstick by which things can be and should be measured. I think in the rest of the world, we're full of emotional arguments, we're full of misconceptions, we're full of things, period, that really are not useful. I think the only way to actually drink better at the end of the day is to take the time and the trouble to understand what the truth is and differentiate fact from fiction. There was, in fact, a group of younger people that used the alcohol platform mostly, again, for emotional pieces, self-aggrandizement, marketing. It really wasn't about the message. What you just so eloquently described is the core. The acidity is being the backbone. It's not that you resent alcohol for its sake. It's the fact that it's not useful. It masks other flavors. And that's a very different argument.
Yes.
That is why this needs to be heard over and over again. That's why I just wish I could put it on billboards. Because if we actually find our way back to the factual data, to people like you that lived it and practiced that craft every day and didn't do it because you wanted a high score or you wanted a big name or a big consulting job. Your motives are so pure. Yeah. You trust the man, you trust the motive. That makes you trustworthy infinitely in my book. And that is why you're such a seminal piece of this discussion. We start the conversation in the middle or in the end. We talk about labels, colors, we talk about elements, and we completely have forsaken the foundation, which is what you've built with your life story.
There's something else I want to add. You judge at wine judging, wine competitions, and I do. I used to do 10 or 12 a year. Now I do probably 6. And one in Michigan, one in Iowa, and then most of the others are in California. Over and over again, I have been seeing in the last 5 years that lower priced wines are winning competitions. It is rare, it's extremely rare that the most expensive wine wins the best wine. It isn't
Isn't that paradoxical, yeah.
They almost always are high alcohol. The very expensive ones, they're way too high alcohol. How could they be good wines? They aren't. And they won't live very long, and they just simply aren't good wines. But the ones that win, I've been noticing it. It comes to mind. And if you look at Gallo, Bronco, the Wine Group, Treasury, Behringer, Sutter Home, the big companies almost invariably keep their alcohol under 14 where it belongs, or in my judgment it belongs. I may be wrong, but that's historically it's been under 14.
The conclusion of this interview can be found in the next podcast, already available for your download. Thanks again for tuning in to the official podcast of Palate Exposure, featuring Ilona Thompson.